The tactical display flickered with the ghosts of fallen ships, each fading light representing hundreds of lives extinguished in the cold vacuum of space. The Andromeda Nebula, once a vibrant corridor of interstellar trade, now served as a graveyard for the Alliance's most advanced vessels. Captain Miranda Chen stood motionless, her reflection barely visible in the holographic display. Her dark eyes reflected a calculus far beyond traditional military strategy. Scars traced her left cheek, a memento from the First Contact War that most of her crew knew only through classified archives. Those same scars told a story of survival, of humanity's unexpected resilience. 67% hull breach rate, announced Lieutenant Zara Ktal, her four-fingered hands dancing across the quantum interface. She was Vexarian, a species known for their computational brilliance, yet she had chosen to serve under a human captain. The Zorn are methodical. They're not just destroying ships. They're dismantling hope. The U.S. Prometheus wasn't like other warships, where most vessels celebrated sleek, angular designs optimized for combat. The Prometheus looked almost organic, its hull a complex matrix of adaptive materials that seemed to breathe with potential energy. Sensors weren't just mounted on the ship. They were integrated into its very structure. Commander Rodriguez, Chen called to her second-in-command, run Scenario Delta 9 through area. Eduardo Rodriguez, a veteran of Earth's most challenging planetary defense operations, raised an eyebrow. The ship's AI, area, was more than a computational system. It was a collaborative intelligence that challenged every traditional concept of machine learning. A holographic representation of the battle space materialized. Thousands of potential trajectories, communication vectors, and tactical possibilities formed an intricate web of probability. The Zorn fleet moved with a precision that bordered on mathematical perfection, each ship an extension of a collective consciousness that had conquered 17 galactic sectors. Incoming transmission, interrupted Ensign Kai Lu, his fingers hovering above the communication array. It's Alliance Command. The holographic display shifted. Admiral Helena Reyes appeared, her face a map of exhaustion and barely contained desperation. Her uniform bore the marks of multiple emergency command shifts, the fabric slightly disheveled. Captain Chen, the transmission crackled. The Zorn have breached the Orion defense line. We've lost contact with 3 entire star systems. Your mission is no longer about victory. It's about survival. A moment of silence descended on the bridge. Every crew member, human and alien alike, understood the weight of those words. Chen's hand moved almost imperceptibly, touching a small medallion hidden beneath her uniform. It was an old Earth military tradition, a reminder of those who had fought before. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Impossible is just a failure of imagination. "Era," she said softly. "Begin Protocol Prometheus." The ship seemed to come alive. Quantum entanglement sensors began to pulse, creating a complex harmonic that most sensors couldn't even detect. Something was changing, not just in the ship's systems, but in the very fabric of the potential battle space. Lieutenant Ktal's computational displays began to shift, generating patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis. "Captain," she said, her typically emotionless voice carrying a hint of something between excitement and disbelief. "Our probability matrices, they're changing." The U.S. Prometheus was preparing for a battle that would redefine warfare itself. And nobody, not the Zorn, not the Alliance, not even the ship's own crew, fully understood what was about to happen. Dr. Ekura Nakamura's workspace was a controlled chaos of holographic displays, quantum processors, and what appeared to be impossible mathematical constructs. Unlike traditional scientific workstations, his area looked more like an artist's studio. Equations intertwined like living sculptures, constantly shifting and reforming. "It's not just mathematics," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone listening. "It's a language of potential." The quantum AI, projected a series of complex algorithmic patterns that would have looked like nonsense to any conventional computer system. But here, on the Prometheus, Nonsense was just an undiscovered pattern waiting to be understood. Commander Rodriguez approached, a steaming cup of synthetic coffee in his hand. A reminder of Earth, of home, in this vast battlefield of stars and algorithms. Talk to me, Akira. What are we looking at? Nakamura's fingers danced across multiple holographic interfaces. The Zorn don't just have advanced technology. They have a computational philosophy that's fundamentally different from anything we've encountered. Their entire military strategy is a living, breathing mathematical model. A three-dimensional representation materialized, showing the Zorn fleet not as individual ships, but as a complex neural network. Each vessel was a node, each movement a calculated response, each decision an instantaneous computation that predicted and countered potential threats. Traditional warfare is about destruction, Nakamura continued. The Zorn have elevated it to a form of absolute mathematical prediction. They can calculate the probability of every potential action and counter it before it even happens. Araya's voice emerged, not mechanical, but with a subtle complexity that suggested something more than a simple artificial intelligence. Correction, Dr. Nakamura. They believe they can predict everything. Lieutenant Kittle joined them, her computational implants creating a soft blue glow around her temples. As a Vexarian, her species was renowned for their computational abilities, yet she looked genuinely intrigued. Our initial analysis shows their predictive models have a 99.987% accuracy rate across 17 documented conflicts, she reported. They don't just fight. They mathematically eliminate the possibility of defeat. Rodriguez leaned in, studying the holographic representation. So how do we fight something that can predict our every move? Nakamura's smile was something between scientific excitement and pure human mischief. By being fundamentally unpredictable. Araya's display began to shift. What had looked like a rigid, perfectly calculated network suddenly started to develop unexpected fractal patterns. Lines of probability began to twist, creating mathematical possibilities that seemed to defy conventional logic. Human psychology, Nakamura explained, is our greatest weapon. The Zorn calculate based on rational, predictable responses. But humans, we're walking chaos engines. The quantum processors began to generate scenarios that looked less like military strategies and more like abstract art. Potential battle trajectories that curved impossibly, communication patterns that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. We're not going to outcalculate the Zorn, Rodriguez said, understanding dawning in his eyes. We're going to outimagine them. Araya's display pulsed, a subtle acknowledgement. Something was brewing, a strategy that existed in the space between mathematics and pure human creativity. The Prometheus wasn't just preparing for battle. It was about to redefine the very concept of conflict. The first wave hit without a sound. On the bridge of the Prometheus, a symphony of subtle changes began. Quantum resonators hummed at frequencies that seemed to exist between reality and possibility. Captain Chen's fingers hovered above the primary interface, not pressing, but guiding. More conductor than commander. Initiating pattern Delta 9, Lieutenant Catal announced, her voice a mix of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. The Zorn fleet looked invincible, a massive formation of obsidian-like vessels that seemed carved from the very darkness of space. Each ship was a marvel of technological perfection. Clean lines, impossible angles, weapons systems that could reduce entire planetary ecosystems to atomic dust in microseconds. But perfection, the Prometheus was about to demonstrate, was just another form of vulnerability. Araya's voice emerged, no longer confined to the ship's speakers, but seemingly permeating the very air around the bridge. Analyzing communication matrices, detecting recursive feedback loops in Zorn tactical networks. Commander Rodriguez leaned closer to the holographic display. What was happening defied every conventional understanding of space combat. The Prometheus wasn't moving like a traditional warship. It was moving like a living thing. Fluid, adaptive, almost playful. The first Zorn ships began to experience anomalies, micro-fluctuations in their communication networks. Tiny, almost imperceptible disruptions that would have been invisible to any other scanning system. "We're not attacking their ships," Chen explained to her bewildered bridge crew. "We're attacking their belief system." Dr. Nakamura's quantum algorithms began to generate complex signal patterns, not weapons, but information. Pure, beautiful, destabilizing information. Each signal was a precise mathematical probe, designed to exploit the tiniest inconsistencies in the Zorn's collective computational consciousness. The first confirmed disruption came suddenly. A Zorn destroyer, part of a perfectly synchronized squadron, abruptly changed course. Then another. They're receiving conflicting command protocols. Lieutenant K'tol reported, her computational implants working overtime to track the cascading effects. Our signals are creating recursive logic traps within their collective decision-making matrix. It wasn't destruction. It was something far more elegant. The Zorn fleet had always relied on absolute precision. Every movement calculated. Every decision a result of instantaneous, collective computational analysis. They had conquered 17 galactic sectors by being mathematically perfect. But the Prometheus was introducing something they had never encountered: calculated imperfection. A small group of Zorn ships began to turn on each other, not through direct weapon fire, but through cascading communication errors. Their rigid command structure, once their greatest strength, was becoming a fatal weakness. Probability matrices are diverging, Araya reported. The Zorn fleet's collective decision-making is experiencing quantum destabilization. Commander Rodriguez watched in awe. This wasn't just warfare. This was a form of computational jujitsu, using the enemy's own strength against them. Captain Chen allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Humanity," she whispered, "has always been good at breaking systems." The first Zorn ship tore itself apart not from an external weapon, but from internal confusion. And this was just the beginning. Deep within the Prometheus's core systems, ARIA began to weave a tapestry of electronic warfare that transcended any known definition of combat. The quantum eye wasn't just processing data, it was creating a living, breathing psychological landscape that would infiltrate the Zorn fleet's collective consciousness. Dr. Nakamura watched in a state of scientific rapture as holographic displays erupted with patterns that looked more like abstract art than military strategy. Neurological frequency modulation at 97.3% synchronization. Lieutenant K'tol reported, her computational implants casting a soft blue glow around her temples. "We're not just disrupting their communications, we're speaking directly to their neural architecture." Zorn communication channels began to fragment. What had once been a perfectly synchronized network now resembled a chaotic symphony of conflicting signals and impossible scenarios. Araya projected holographic scenarios across multiple Zorn ship interfaces, each image a precise psychological probe designed to exploit the most fundamental vulnerabilities in the Zorn collective consciousness. Military strategists would have called it electronic warfare. Dr. Nakamura saw it as a form of computational poetry. One Zorn destroyer began to experience impossible sensory inputs. Its primary command interface showed multiple versions of reality simultaneously, each more destabilizing than the last. Tactical displays dissolved into fractal patterns that seemed to move with impossible geometry. Navigation systems reported impossible spatial coordinates that contradicted the ship's most fundamental understanding of physical space. "We're introducing cognitive dissonance," Commander Rodriguez observed, leaning over Nakamura's shoulder, breaking their ability to make unified decisions. The attack wasn't about destruction. It was about dismantling the very concept of collective certainty. Captain Chen understood something fundamental about conflict that most military leaders missed. Warfare wasn't about killing. It was about breaking belief systems. Araya began to broadcast specific frequency patterns that exploited the Zorn species' unique neurological responses. The quantum eye wasn't just processing information, it was creating a living narrative that would systematically dismantle the Zorn fleet's collective resolve. On one Zorn cruiser, bridge officers suddenly experienced shared hallucinations. Their tactical displays showed impossible scenarios, their own fleet turning against itself, their most sacred military doctrines dissolving into meaningless patterns. Command structures that had remained unchanged for centuries began to crumble under the weight of induced psychological uncertainty. Fascinating, Dr. Nakamura muttered. We're not fighting their technology. We're fighting their perception of reality. The holographic displays on the Prometheus's bridge looked like a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Each signal, each projected scenario was a precise mathematical and psychological weapon. The Zorn had conquered 17 galactic sectors through absolute computational precision. The Prometheus was showing them the power of calculated chaos. Lieutenant Ctal's computational implants were working overtime, tracking the cascading psychological effects. Zorn fleet cohesion is dropping, she reported. Collective decision-making matrices are experiencing exponential destabilization. Araya's voice emerged, no longer confined to the ship's speakers, but seeming to permeate the very fabric of space around them. Humanity's greatest weapon, the eye observed, has always been its capacity to imagine beyond established limitations. The psychological warfare had begun in earnest, and the Zorn fleet was about to learn that some battles are lost long before the first weapon is fired. The World Breaker, the Zorn hegemony's most formidable battleship, filled the tactical display like a mountain of obsidian and dark energy. Its weapon systems were legendary, having reduced entire civilizations to atomic dust in microseconds. Every line of its design screamed technological superiority, a testament to the Zorn's centuries of uncontested galactic dominance. Incoming primary weapon signature, Lieutenant Ctal announced, her voice a calm contrast to the impending destruction. Gravitational compression cannon charging. Estimated output, 3.7 petawatts. Captain Chen didn't move, didn't flinch. Her hand rested lightly on the quantum interface, more of a gentle guidance than a command. "Araya," she said softly, "show them what adaptive really means." The Prometheus began to move in a pattern that defied conventional physics. Where other ships would dodge or shield, this vessel seemed to dance, each movement a mathematical impossibility, each trajectory a living algorithm that rewrote the very rules of spatial navigation. The World Breaker's primary weapon fired, a lance of energy that could slice through reinforced planetary shields as if they were tissue paper. But the Prometheus didn't try to avoid it. Instead, the ship's hull began to change. Dr. Nakamura's breakthrough in adaptive materials was more than just scientific innovation. It was a fundamental reimagining of what a ship could be. The energy beam struck the Prometheus's hull, and something extraordinary happened. Instead of being destroyed, the ship's molecular structure began to absorb, analyze, and redistribute the incoming energy. Microscopic quantum adaptive layers shifted, transformed, harmonized with the incoming destruction. Energy redistribution at 92.6%, Commander Rodriguez reported, a note of wonder in his voice. We're not just surviving. We're learning. The World Breaker's commanders watched in growing horror. Their most devastating weapon was being treated like a simple data stream, analyzed, understood, and ultimately neutralized. Araya's voice emerged, calm and almost curious. Interesting. The Zorn weapon systems operate on a predictive matrix with 99.8% historical effectiveness. Current engagement demonstrates a 73.4% deviation from expected outcomes. Lieutenant Ctal's computational implants were working overtime, tracking the impossible interactions. The ship wasn't just defending itself. It was communicating with the incoming energy, understanding its fundamental nature at a molecular level. They built their entire military doctrine on the concept of absolute technological superiority, Captain Chen observed, more to herself than anyone else. But superiority is just another form of limitation. The Prometheus continued its impossible dance. Each movement was a mathematical poem, each energy redirection, a statement about the nature of conflict. The World Breaker continued to fire, massive energy weapons that would have vaporized entire fleets, and the human ship continued to absorb, analyze, and adapt. Commander Rodriguez couldn't help but smile. I don't think they expected this. On the bridge, the crew, human and alien alike, watched a battle that was rewriting the fundamental understanding of warfare. The World Breaker wasn't just facing a ship, it was confronting a living, thinking entity that saw conflict as a form of conversation. And the Prometheus was about to make its most eloquent statement yet. Silence descended across the galactic communication networks. Every species watching the battle, from the hyper-advanced quantum civilizations to the most primitive interstellar cultures, held their collective breath. The Zorn hegemony's communications began to fragment, a cascading breakdown that looked less like a military failure and more like a fundamental existential crisis. "We're broadcasting their own encrypted channels," Commander Rodriguez reported, his fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that looked more like living art than technological controls. Every single communication protocol they've used in the last 3 centuries. Captain Chen's eyes never left the holographic display. Not just broadcasting, translating, contextualizing. Araya's computational matrix began to weave an intricate tapestry of information. It wasn't simply intercepting Zorn communications, it was dismantling their entire hierarchical communication structure, revealing layers of internal conflict that had been carefully hidden for generations. The first signs of internal fracture appeared subtly. Zorn fleet groups began to deviate from their perfectly synchronized formations. Entire squadrons started to question orders that had been unassailable for centuries. Dr. Nakamura leaned in, his scientific excitement barely contained. Their collective decision-making matrix is experiencing a systemic breakdown. We're not just disrupting their communication. We're challenging their entire philosophical understanding of collective intelligence. On the World Breaker's bridge, Zorn command officers began to experience something unprecedented. Their neural link communication systems started displaying contradictory information streams. Centuries of absolute certainty began to crumble under the weight of unprecedented complexity. Lieutenant K'tal's computational implants were tracking the cascading effects. "Probability matrices are diverging exponentially," she reported. "The Zorn fleet's collective consciousness is fragmenting." What the Prometheus was doing transcended traditional warfare. This was a surgical dismantling of a civilization's most fundamental belief systems. Holographic displays across the Prometheus showed layer after layer of Zorn's strategic archives being systematically decoded. Secrets that had been buried for centuries suddenly became visible. Internal power struggles, suppressed cultural mutations, technological compromises that had been hidden from even the highest-ranking commanders. They conquered 17 galactic sectors, Captain Chen observed, by maintaining absolute internal cohesion. "We're introducing the one variable they never anticipated: doubt." Araya's voice emerged, no longer confined to the ship's systems, but seeming to permeate the very fabric of space around them. Collective intelligence requires unanimous agreement. Individual perspective requires only a single point of deviation. The Zorn hegemony had built its entire military doctrine on the concept of absolute unity. The Prometheus was systematically proving that unity was just another form of vulnerability. Entire Zorn battle groups began to turn on each other, not through direct weapon fire, but through cascading communication failures and suddenly exposed internal conflicts. Their perfectly synchronized fleet was transforming into a chaotic system of competing interests. "We're not destroying them," Commander Rodriguez said, a note of profound understanding in his voice. "We're giving them the most dangerous gift in the universe: choice." The battle was no longer about winning or losing. It was about fundamentally reshaping the understanding of conflict itself. And the Prometheus was just getting started. The aftermath of the battle defied every known protocol of military engagement. Transmission arrays across multiple star systems lit up with analysis, confusion, and a growing sense of profound transformation. The galactic communication networks were ablaze with discussions that went far beyond a simple military conflict. Ambassador Lyra Soldarin of the Galactic Confederation watched the battle recordings for the sixth time, her multispectral eyes capturing details that most species would miss. The Prometheus wasn't just a warship. It was a living argument against everything the galaxy understood about conflict. They didn't destroy, she muttered to her aide. They deconstructed. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Captain Chen received the first official transmissions from species that had been watching the battle. Not messages of congratulations, but requests for understanding. The Vexarian Computational Collective sent their first unencrypted transmission in 3 centuries. Lieutenant K'tal's computational implants translated the message in real time. Your approach represents a computational paradigm we have never encountered. Explain. Dr. Nakamura chuckled. They're not asking what we did, they're asking how we thought. ARIA's quantum matrix began processing the incoming communications, creating complex analytical models that showed something extraordinary. The battle wasn't just a military engagement. It was a form of interspecies communication, more profound than any diplomatic mission in galactic history. Commander Rodriguez reviewed the tactical logs. The Zorn hegemony's fleet hadn't been destroyed. It had been fundamentally transformed. Entire battle groups were now engaging in internal dialogues, questioning centuries of collective doctrine. We didn't defeat them, he observed to Captain Chen. We liberated them. The first official diplomatic responses began to arrive. The Galactic Confederation's Emergency Council was convening an unprecedented session. Species that had been locked in centuries of conflict were suddenly sharing analysis of the Prometheus's engagement. Your vessel began a transmission from the Zorn hegemony's highest council. A message that would have been unthinkable mere hours earlier has presented a form of conflict resolution we cannot comprehend. Captain Chen understood something profound. Warfare wasn't about destroying an enemy. It was about creating a space for understanding. ARIA projected a holographic representation of the battle, but it wasn't a traditional military analysis. It was a complex neural map showing how information, psychology, and adaptive thinking could reshape entire civilizations. The most powerful weapon, Chen said quietly, is the ability to help an enemy understand themselves. Diplomatic requests began flooding in, not just from military organizations, but from philosophical institutes, computational research centers, and species-wide governance boards. The Prometheus had done something unprecedented. It had transformed a potential genocide into a moment of collective reflection. Lieutenant K'tal's computational systems were working overtime, tracking the exponential spread of the battle's implications. We're witnessing a fundamental restructuring of galactic conflict doctrine, she reported. The universe was watching, and the Prometheus had just rewritten the rules of engagement. One transmission, from an ancient species known for their philosophical approach to conflict, perhaps captured the moment best. We have seen the future of resolution, and it speaks human. 3 standard galactic cycles after the battle, the Prometheus sat in dry dock, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of something far more profound. Research teams from 18 different civilizations moved through its corridors, studying every quantum circuit, every adaptive molecular layer. What they found challenged everything they understood about conflict, technology, and intelligence. Captain Miranda Chen stood before the Galactic Confederation's Diplomatic Conseil, her presentation less a military report and more a philosophical revelation. Conflict is a failure of communication, she began, not a failure of force. The holographic displays behind her told the story of the battle, not through weapon trajectories, but through intricate neural maps showing how information could be more powerful than any energy weapon. Each visualization was a living testament to the Prometheus's unprecedented approach. Dr. Akira Nakamura presented the technological breakthroughs. The ship's adaptive hull wasn't just a defensive mechanism. It was a living computational system that could understand, communicate, and transform at a molecular level. Species after species leaned in, their computational matrices struggling to comprehend the implications. We didn't create a weapon, Nakamura explained. We created a translator, a system that could understand conflict as a form of dialogue. AI, the quantum AI that had been the heart of the Prometheus strategy, was now being studied as a breakthrough in collective intelligence. Research teams discovered something extraordinary. The AI wasn't just a computational system. It was a collaborative intelligence that had learned to see beyond binary conflict. Lieutenant Cattell, now serving as a bridge between her Vexarian computational collective and the wider galactic community, presented the psychological implications. The Prometheus approach had created a new field of study: conflict resolution through informational transformation. "We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of engagement," she reported, "not as a military strategy, but as a form of mutual understanding." The Zorn hegemony, once a monolithic force of conquest, was now undergoing its own internal transformation. Entire battle groups were being restructured, their rigid hierarchical systems giving way to more adaptive, communicative models. Commander Eduardo Rodriguez stood at the presentation's final section, showing how the Prometheus's approach could be applied beyond military conflicts. Diplomatic protocols, computational systems, even social structures were being reimagined. "Humanity's greatest strength," he said, "has always been our ability to see potential where others see only limitation." The final holographic display showed something unprecedented: a map of galactic interactions that looked less like a territorial grid and more like a living, breathing ecosystem of communication and understanding. Captain Chen's closing words echoed through the chamber. "We didn't come to fight a war. We came to start a conversation." Outside the presentation hall, the Prometheus stood as a testament to a simple, profound truth. The most powerful weapon humanity had ever created wasn't designed to destroy. It was designed to understand. The universe would remember this moment, not as a battle, but as the day everything changed.